Hey there, my name is Anem Sayan, and welcome to another episode of... So, this one has been on my list for a while, and when I say a while, I'm talking roughly 18 years, but for some reason or another, I just never got round to it. The reason it's been on my list so long is because way back in the early days of Xbox Live, when the service was still finding its feet, I put a lot of hours into an online multiplayer demo that existed for this title, partly because I was desperate to play anything on Xbox Live, but also because it was pretty darn fun. Ever since then, I always intended to give it a go, but during this period, around 2003 and 2004, a lot of games came out, but not only that, a lot of great games came out, so I was very much occupied with the feast of high quality titles of the time, and then it wasn't long before the next generation started. Now, almost 20 years later, I thought what better game could I pick for my Does It Hold Up series than a cult classic that I never really played back then and can approach with a fresh pair of eyes in 2022 with very little bias. So here we are in episode 3 with Crimson Skies: High Road to Revenge. One thing that I wasn't aware of is that this is the second game in the Crimson Skies series. The original was a PC game released in 2000 and leans slightly more towards simulation, whereas the second game, High Road to Revenge, leans slightly more towards arcade in terms of style. 2 years after the original, High Road to Revenge was announced for the original Xbox, but wouldn't actually land, get it, until October of 2003. When it did arrive, it was certainly a critical success with most reviews above 8 out of 10, but sadly it was not a commercial success, which is probably why we've never seen another title in the series. Now, I don't know if anyone else has this issue, but one big problem I have when it comes to revisiting older games is something that I call the rose-tinted demo. What is a rose-tinted demo? Well, I'm glad you asked. It's a problem that I imagine doesn't exist as much anymore because gaming doesn't work in quite the same way as it did back in the late 90s and early 2000s, but to explain, a rose-tinted demo is basically when you play a small fraction of a game at a friend's house through a demo disc or even at a demo kiosk inside of a game store, and you are blown away for about 5 to 10 minutes, but because you're a kid with very little money, you never actually get the opportunity to play the full game until years later, at which point you realise that you were just a dumb little kid and it wasn't that great at all, but you just didn't play it long enough to realise.
Disappointed!
Now, I've been obsessed with games since about the age of 4, so this has obviously happened to me a number of times. Perfect examples would be Brute Force, The Punisher, Ghost Hunter, The Getaway. But once every so often, that little snippet that you played of a game back then was actually as good as you remember it being, and luckily this was the case for Crimson Skies. What's even more impressive is that I don't usually care for aerial combat / dogfighting games, not because I have any particular issue with the genre, solely because I've never been very good at them and generally find myself having an awkward and disoriented time, but Crimson Skies managed to win me over. High Road to Revenge takes place in an alternate history version of 1930s America, where large chunks of the United States have decided to group up into their own sovereignties, and as a result, highways and train lines that would link different states were never built, and because of this, planes and zeppelins became the main method of transportation. Also, apparently slavery is still a thing in this alternate timeline, but never mind that because we're moving on quickly. You play as Nathan Zachary, the leader of an air pirate gang known as the Fortune Hunters, and if you're looking at this guy and wondering if he's just as much of the Indiana Jones / Han Solo type of character as he looks, then you are absolutely 100% correct, and there's not much else to say about him than that. Early into the game, Nathan and his friends receive a distress call from an old scientist buddy, Dr. Fastenbinder, saying that there was a break-in at his lab as he believes someone attempted to steal schematics for a superweapon. Not too long after visiting the doctor, they are attacked, and sadly the doctor doesn't survive the encounter, but from here we follow Nathan and his crew as they not only try to bring the killers to justice, but also figure out and foil whatever evil plans were made for the previously mentioned superweapon. One of the interesting things about High Road to Revenge is that when it initially went into development, the plan was to make something more along the lines of an interactive movie. From what I understand, they made a decent amount of progress with this before changing directions, but the reason I bring this up is because it feels like some of the elements of that original project made it into the final game, because while the story isn't a game changer, I will say that it is very well produced.
Well, I trust I was a gentleman last night. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a plane to catch.
When actually getting stuck into the game, the structure was a lot less linear than I expected. Although it does have the standard get in, kill the bad guys and get out type of missions, it also features a few open areas for you to explore. In these open areas you'll find side missions, races, collectibles, so taking a bit of time to fly around these sections to make sure you've done everything is worth your time. My only gripe with these areas is that the side missions and the main missions both show up as blue icons on the map, so you might accidentally start a mission and push on to the next area without clearing the map if you're not careful. The majority of the side missions are you helping locals defend something from pirates, escorting someone through an area filled with enemies, or picking up and dropping off packages. All of these tasks are short and sweet, so you don't have to worry about getting stuck for too long. The races are also pretty fun. Well, then again, I suppose they're not actually races, but more like time trials that you have to beat. You can choose how much you want to bet, and I always put down the maximum amount because, you know, I like to live on the edge. Dotted around the environments are also these tokens that you'll use as upgrade currency. Some you'll find as you complete the missions, some you'll have to do a little searching for, and some you'll be gifted for completing specific tasks. And the upgrades to your planes do not come cheap, so I would highly recommend grabbing these if you see them. You'll also jump out of your plane from time to time and jump into turrets and AA guns attached to trains, zeppelins and bases. To be honest, sometimes it's easier to finish a mission in one of these turrets because you are stationary. Is it as fun as flying a plane? No, but it does break things up a bit. I think the biggest reason why I enjoyed my time with Crimson Skies as much as I did is because not only is it very action-packed and light-hearted, but it is also very forgiving. 90% of your time will be spent trailing an enemy plane as you try and line up your machine guns or missiles to take them down, and within 10 minutes of playing you'll get to grips with the controls, and within an hour of playing you'll feel confident enough to fly through tight spaces or even pull off a few tricks in the air. I can always appreciate a game that keeps things simple and basically says, okay, here's how to play the game, now go and have fun, and that's kind of what you have here. Just a constant flow of flying from one place to the next, blowing things up, while also not having to worry too much about any huge spikes in difficulty, and even when you do fail, the checkpoints are so frequent enough that you can just jump straight back in. The combat works well because none of the enemies are huge bullet sponges, meaning if you're accurate enough you can actually get a lot of quick kills in a short space of time that make you feel like you're a much better pilot than you actually are. And even though it can be tricky sometimes, judging if you're close enough for a missile to lock on, successfully killing an enemy with a missile is never not satisfying. Things don't get too stale either, because every now and then Crimson Skies throws a boss battle at you that requires you to be a little more thoughtful, and suddenly you sit upright in your chair when things get serious as a giant mechanical worm starts tearing shit up. Also, to help keep things fresh is the selection of aircraft that you can unlock and upgrade. Some of them you'll fly in for specific missions and then they'll get added to your collection, but each plane has its own stats. Some are faster, some are stronger, but in all honesty I just stuck with Nathan's original plane for the bulk of my playthrough because it's a good all-rounder and simply I just thought it looked the coolest. Speaking of looking cool, I really dug the design of this world. Across the game you'll visit tropical islands, desert canyons and built up cities with skyscrapers, and all of these have enough quirk and character to their design to make them more interesting to fly around. The creative ways in which the designers for this game put together all of these different areas that reflect the alternate history of a broken up United States where planes are the primary transport system is so well put together that I wish there were even more environments to explore. I will say that it absolutely looks like a game from 2003, and when you fly a little too close to the ground you can sometimes see some of the rougher spots in terms of models and textures. But considering how big these spaces are, considering how fast you're moving across them, and considering the fact that the draw distance is pretty darn good, I didn't see any serious hitches in frame rate, so it seems like they found the right balance between performance and visual complexity. Now, just like I mentioned earlier that the cutscenes feel like they benefited from the game's initial direction as an interactive movie, this benefit also applies to the audio. The soundtrack is especially enjoyable as it really leans into that old school adventure vibe without sounding like it's ripping off something else. I've always thought that great game soundtracks are ones that enhance the experience just enough to make the game more exciting and help you zone out and immerse yourself in that world that little bit more. They play a big part in holding your attention and creating a more memorable time, and this is how I describe the High Road to Revenge soundtrack. The voice work was pleasantly surprising too. I feel like I can tell when voice actors are taking their job seriously while also having fun with it at the same time. The lines may be cheesy and silly, but they're delivered well enough to not make you cringe. It has likeable characters that are so likeable because the performances from the actors are so well done, but then again, as this started as an interactive movie, I guess they really needed to nail that aspect of the game as it was going to be one of the main focuses.
Nathan, are you cool, y'all? This is my plan now.
Yeah, well, you win some, you lose some.
I still have your sapling!
So during the process of making this video, I've been trying to find things to be critical of, things that I could point at and say, oh, that needs improving, or this game needs more of this or less of that. But really, when it comes right down to it, I don't have much to say at all in that regard. When a game decides to keep things light, fun and simple and executes all of that well, it would be pointless of me to say something like, it's great but it needs more depth, because that was never their aim in the first place. What is here works well enough that you don't think about what could be missing. I really wish I had picked this up back in 2003, because if I did, I know I would have had an absolute ball with it across a weekend and would have been able to appreciate it more back then when it looked and felt even more impressive. Crimson Sky's High Road to Revenge is a great example of why sometimes the more simple games age the best. There's no learning curve or period of adjustment here, you can just jump straight in and have a good time, and really that's what we all want when returning to older games. So if you do see this game, just pick it up. It's not even expensive enough anymore for you to regret it. Anyway, if you've played this game and have some fond memories of it, I'd love to hear about them. Also, if you've played this game and have some terrible memories of it, I'd love to hear about them. And if you like this video, then do all of the good supportive stuff down below. That's going to do it for this video. I've been Inept Saiyan. You, as always, have been a wonderful audience, and I hope to see you next time.